For more than 5,000 years, he remained frozen in silence. Locked inside a glacier high in the Alps, his body survived storms, ice ages, and the rise and fall of entire civilizations. Scientists believed they knew almost everything there was to know about him. His wounds, his final meal, even the day he died. But now, more than 30 years after his discovery, researchers have uncovered something nobody expected. Deep inside the remains of this ancient mummy, they found signs of life, not a preserved organ, not a hidden artifact, something far stranger. Tiny living organisms that may have survived thousands of years trapped within a body that should have been completely dead. The discovery is raising astonishing questions. How did they survive? What exactly are they? And could this frozen man still be carrying secrets from a world that disappeared more than 5 millennia ago? Because what scientists just found inside this mummy is changing everything we thought we knew about death, preservation, and the limits of life itself. But before we begin, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. The Man Who Refused to Disappear. The story begins high in the frozen peaks of the Alps, where nature had been quietly guarding one of humanity's greatest archaeological treasures for more than 5,000 years. In September of 1991, 2 German hikers were making their way through the rugged Ötztal Alps, near the border between Italy and Austria, when they noticed something unusual emerging from the melting ice. At first glance, it looked like the remains of a modern mountain climber who had become trapped during a storm. Part of a human body was visible above the surface, darkened by centuries of exposure, and surrounded by ancient ice that had only recently begun to retreat. The discovery didn't seem particularly extraordinary. Every year, climbers disappear in remote mountain regions, and the initial assumption was that this was simply another tragic accident. Rescue teams were dispatched to recover the body, expecting to identify a relatively recent victim and return him to his family. But almost immediately, things began to feel strange. The equipment found near the body didn't resemble anything modern. There were no synthetic materials, no metal climbing tools, no signs of contemporary gear. Instead, investigators found primitive-looking objects that seemed completely out of place. The deeper they looked, the more obvious it became that they were dealing with something far older than anyone had imagined. When archaeologists finally examined the remains, they made a stunning realization. This man had not died decades earlier. He had not even died centuries earlier. He had been dead for more than 500 years. The body belonged to a man who had lived during the Copper Age, thousands of years before the construction of Stonehenge, centuries before the first Egyptian pyramids rose above the desert sands, and long before most of the civilizations we learn about in history books had even begun to exist. The world soon came to know him as Ötzi the Iceman, named after the mountain range where he was discovered. Overnight, he became one of the most important archaeological finds ever uncovered. Scientists suddenly had access to something incredibly rare, a perfectly preserved human being from a prehistoric world that had almost completely vanished from history. Unlike the carefully prepared mummies of ancient Egypt, Ötzi was never meant to be preserved. There were no rituals, no embalming procedures, and no elaborate tomb designed to protect his body. Instead, nature itself had performed the preservation. Shortly after his death, his body became trapped beneath snow and ice. Over thousands of years, the glacier acted like a giant natural freezer, sealing him away from the bacteria, oxygen, and environmental conditions that normally cause human remains to decay. The result was astonishing. His skin survived, his clothing survived, his weapons survived. Even the contents of his stomach remained preserved. Scientists could examine details that would normally disappear forever after death. They could study what he ate, what diseases he suffered from, where he traveled during his lifetime, and even reconstruct some of the final moments before his death. It was as if a doorway had suddenly opened into a lost chapter of human history. Over the following decades, researchers subjected Ötzi to every scientific test imaginable. Advanced CT scans peered inside his body. DNA sequencing revealed details about his ancestry. Chemical analysis of his teeth and bones traced the regions where he had spent different parts of his life. Each new investigation uncovered another piece of the puzzle, transforming him into one of the most studied human beings who ever lived. Yet despite more than 30 years of research, scientists continued to believe that they had already uncovered most of his secrets. They were wrong, because hidden deep within this frozen time capsule was something no one had been searching for. Something so unexpected that it would force researchers to look at the famous mummy in an entirely new way. And what they found wasn't simply preserved by the ice. According to recent findings, it may have survived it. For years after Ötzi's discovery, scientists believed they understood the basic story of his death. The most logical explanation seemed simple. A man traveling through the mountains had been caught in harsh weather, overcome by exhaustion and freezing temperatures, and eventually died alone in the wilderness. It was a tragic ending, but not an unusual one. The Alps have claimed countless lives throughout history, and many experts initially assumed Ötzi had suffered the same fate. But as technology advanced, researchers gained new tools capable of examining his body in extraordinary detail. What they discovered would completely transform the investigation. In 2001, nearly a decade after Ötzi had been found, scientists performed a high-resolution CT scan of his body. Hidden beneath layers of tissue and preserved flesh, they noticed something alarming. An arrowhead was lodged deep inside his left shoulder. The projectile had gone unnoticed for years because most of the wooden shaft had long since disappeared. Only the stone arrowhead remained, embedded inside his body like a frozen piece of evidence from a prehistoric crime scene. The discovery changed everything. Further examination revealed that the arrow had severed a major artery. Modern medical experts concluded that the injury would have caused rapid internal bleeding. Even with today's medical treatment, such a wound would be extremely dangerous. 5,000 years ago, it was almost certainly fatal. Suddenly, Ötzi was no longer viewed as a traveler who had simply succumbed to the elements. He was a victim. Someone had shot him. And that raised a far more disturbing question: who wanted him dead? As scientists continued their investigation, more clues began to emerge. Deep cuts were found on his hands, particularly between his thumb and index finger. The wounds appeared to have occurred only days before his death and were consistent with defensive injuries often seen in violent confrontations. It looked as though Ötzi had recently been involved in a struggle. Perhaps a fight, perhaps an attack, perhaps something even more personal. Researchers began piecing together the final hours of his life with astonishing precision. Analysis of his stomach contents revealed that he had eaten a substantial meal shortly before he died. He wasn't starving, lost, or desperately wandering through the mountains. In fact, he appeared to be relatively well prepared. His final meal included meat from wild ibex, grains, and other foods rich in energy. This suggested he had intentionally prepared for a difficult journey. Yet despite being equipped for survival, he never made it home. His belongings only deepened the mystery. When archaeologists examined the items found near his body, they discovered a remarkable collection of tools and weapons. He carried a copper axe, a highly valuable object during that era. He also possessed a knife, a bow, unfinished arrows, and carefully crafted clothing designed to withstand extreme mountain conditions. The copper axe was particularly significant. At the time, copper was rare and precious. Ownership of such an item likely indicated status, wealth, or importance within his community. Some experts have even suggested that Ötzi may have held a position of influence. If that's true, his death becomes even more intriguing. Was he robbed? Apparently not. The valuable axe remained beside his body. Was he ambushed? Was he fleeing from enemies? Was he involved in a conflict between rival groups? Or was this the result of a personal dispute that escalated into deadly violence? The evidence points in multiple directions, but no definitive answers have emerged. Adding to the mystery, traces of blood from several different individuals were found on some of Ötzi's weapons and equipment. This suggests that other people may have been injured during the events leading up to his death. Some researchers believe he may have been involved in a larger confrontation shortly before climbing into the mountains. It's possible that the frozen body discovered thousands of years later was the final chapter of a much larger story. A conflict, a pursuit, a desperate escape. Whatever happened, Ötzi eventually reached a high mountain pass where he collapsed and died. Snow soon covered his body. Seasons passed. The snow became ice. The ice became a glacier. And for more than 5 millennia, the evidence remained locked away beneath the frozen landscape. The case became one of archaeology's most fascinating cold cases. Scientists reconstructed his appearance, analyzed his DNA, studied his wounds, and examined every object found at the scene. Piece by piece, they rebuilt the story of a man who lived and died thousands of years before recorded history. It seemed that Ötzi's greatest secret had finally been uncovered, the mystery of how he died. But decades later, researchers would discover something even more astonishing. Because while scientists were focused on solving a prehistoric murder, they completely overlooked another mystery hidden inside the famous mummy. A mystery that wasn't about death at all. It was about life. The discovery nobody expected. For more than 3 decades, scientists believed that Ötzi had already revealed most of his secrets. His DNA had been sequenced. His organs had been studied. His clothing, weapons, tattoos, and even the contents of his stomach had been analyzed in extraordinary detail. Researchers from around the world had examined nearly every part of his body, turning the famous Iceman into one of the most thoroughly investigated human remains in history. It seemed impossible that anything truly surprising could still be hidden inside him. But science has a habit of revealing the unexpected when new technology arrives. In recent years, researchers began applying advanced genetic sequencing techniques capable of detecting microscopic traces of life that older methods simply couldn't identify. These tools can analyze tiny fragments of biological material, uncovering organisms that would have remained completely invisible just a decade ago. Their goal wasn't to search for anything alive. They were studying the ancient biological environment preserved within Ötzi's remains. Scientists wanted to understand what kinds of microorganisms had existed inside and around his body at the time of his death. It was expected to be a routine scientific investigation. Instead, they stumbled onto something astonishing. Deep within samples taken from the mummy, researchers identified microorganisms that had survived in an extraordinary state of preservation. Some appeared to have entered a dormant condition so extreme that they effectively shut down almost every biological process, allowing them to endure for periods of time that seem almost impossible. To understand why this discovery is so remarkable, it's important to understand what normally happens after death. The moment a human body dies, countless microorganisms begin breaking it down. Bacteria multiply rapidly. Soft tissues decompose. Within years, most biological traces disappear. Given enough time, almost everything is lost. 5,000 years is far beyond the point where scientists would expect any living biological system to remain intact. Yet Ötzi was not preserved under normal conditions. Almost immediately after his death, his body became trapped beneath layers of snow and ice. Temperatures remained incredibly low. Oxygen levels were limited. Biological activity slowed to a crawl. The glacier essentially created one of the most effective natural preservation chambers ever discovered on Earth. For thousands of years, the frozen environment shielded his remains from many of the processes that normally destroy organic material, and it may have done the same for certain microscopic forms of life. Scientists often compare this state to suspended animation. The organisms were not actively growing. They were not reproducing. They were not carrying out the normal functions associated with life. Instead, they entered a biological survival mode that allowed them to endure extreme conditions while waiting for a more favorable environment. It's a strategy used by some microorganisms today. Certain bacteria can survive intense radiation, extreme droughts, freezing temperatures, and even the vacuum of space by entering dormant states. In this condition, life slows to such an extent that it becomes incredibly difficult to distinguish from death itself. What shocked researchers was the timescale. We're not talking about survival for years, or even centuries. We're talking about thousands of years. The implications immediately captured the attention of scientists far beyond the field of archaeology. Microbiologists wanted to understand the mechanisms that allowed these organisms to survive for so long. Geneticists saw an opportunity to study biological systems preserved from an entirely different era of human history. And perhaps most surprisingly, astrobiologists, scientists who search for life beyond Earth, became intensely interested in the findings. Because if microorganisms can survive millennia trapped inside frozen environments on Earth, what might be possible elsewhere? Mars contains enormous deposits of ancient ice. Jupiter's moon Europa hides a vast ocean beneath a frozen crust. Saturn's moon Enceladus continuously ejects icy plumes into space. Across the solar system, frozen worlds are everywhere. And suddenly, Ötzi's body was offering a real-world example of how life might persist under conditions once thought impossible. The discovery also raised a profound philosophical question. What does it actually mean to be alive? If an organism stops growing, stops moving, and remains dormant for thousands of years, is it truly alive during that time? Or is it something in between life and death? Scientists are still debating these questions. What they do know is that the tiny organisms discovered within Ötzi challenge long-held assumptions about the limits of biological survival. They demonstrate that life can be far more resilient than we once imagined. And perhaps most fascinating of all, they remind us that even after 30 years of study, the Iceman continues to surprise the scientific world. A man who died more than 5,300 years ago is still revealing new secrets. Not about how he lived, not about how he died, but about how life itself refuses to disappear. What the tiny survivors could reveal. At first glance, the discovery of ancient microorganisms inside a 5,300-year-old mummy might seem like a fascinating scientific curiosity. But to researchers, it represents something far more significant. These microscopic survivors may contain information that has been locked away since a time when human civilization looked completely different from the world we know today. Every living organism carries a biological record of the environment in which it existed. Hidden within their genetic code are clues about ancient climates, ecosystems, diseases, and evolutionary processes that unfolded thousands of years ago. In a sense, these microorganisms are not just remnants of the past. They are living archives. Scientists believe that studying these ancient microbes could provide an unprecedented glimpse into a world that vanished long before written history began. During Ötzi's lifetime, Europe was a vastly different place. Human populations were smaller, landscapes were less altered by agriculture, and countless species of microorganisms existed in ecosystems that no longer survive today. Some of the genetic traits preserved within these organisms may have disappeared from the modern world entirely. One area of particular interest is human health. Researchers are increasingly realizing that microorganisms have played a crucial role in human evolution. The bacteria, fungi, and microbes that live within and around us influence everything from digestion to immune function. By studying ancient microbial communities, scientists hope to understand how the relationship between humans and microorganisms has changed over thousands of years. The findings may even help answer questions about modern diseases. Some researchers suspect that comparing ancient microbes with their modern descendants could reveal how certain pathogens evolved, adapted, and spread through human populations over time. It may also shed light on how antibiotic resistance developed and how microorganisms respond to environmental pressures across centuries. But perhaps the most astonishing lesson comes from the microorganisms themselves. Their survival demonstrates an extraordinary biological resilience that few scientists fully appreciated. These organisms endured freezing temperatures, isolation, nutrient deprivation, and the passage of thousands of years, conditions that would seem utterly incompatible with life. Yet somehow they persisted. The discovery is forcing scientists to reconsider the limits of survival. If tiny organisms can remain viable after millennia trapped within a frozen human body, there may be countless other examples of dormant life waiting to be discovered in glaciers, permafrost, and other extreme environments around the world. And the deeper researchers investigate, the more one realization becomes impossible to ignore. Life may be far more durable than we ever imagined. The bigger mystery. As remarkable as this discovery is, the most profound questions it raises may have nothing to do with archaeology. Instead, they concern one of the oldest mysteries in science itself. What exactly is life? For most people, the answer seems obvious. Living things grow, reproduce, consume energy, and respond to their environment. Dead things do not. But discoveries like the one inside Ötzi's body blur that distinction in ways that are difficult to explain. These microorganisms were not actively living in the traditional sense. For thousands of years, they performed no visible biological functions. They did not grow, they did not reproduce. They remained frozen in an almost motionless state, suspended between activity and complete extinction. Yet they were not truly dead either. Given the right conditions, some microorganisms can awaken from dormancy and resume life processes as though only a brief period of time had passed. To them, thousands of years may effectively become a biological pause button. This challenges one of our most fundamental assumptions about existence. Perhaps life is not always a continuous process. Perhaps it can stop, wait, and begin again. The implications extend far beyond the frozen mountains where Ötzi was found. Across the solar system, scientists have identified environments that may resemble the conditions that preserve these organisms. Mars contains ancient ice deposits that have remained frozen for millions of years. Beneath the icy crust of Jupiter's moon, Europa, lies a vast hidden ocean. Saturn's moon Enceladus continuously ejects water-rich material into space from beneath its frozen surface. For decades, researchers have wondered whether life could survive in such places. Now they have a powerful example from Earth itself. If microscopic organisms can endure thousands of years trapped inside a glacier, perhaps life elsewhere does not need warm temperatures, sunlight, or ideal conditions to survive. Perhaps it simply needs patience. This is why astrobiologists have become increasingly interested in discoveries like the one found within Ötzi. Every new example of extreme survival expands our understanding of where life might exist and how long it might endure. In a strange and unexpected way, a prehistoric man frozen in the Alps may be helping scientists search for life among the stars. And perhaps that is the greatest irony of all. When hikers discovered Ötzi emerging from the melting ice in 1991, they believed they had found a relic of the distant past. Instead, they may have uncovered clues about the future. A man who lived before the pyramids were built is now helping scientists answer questions about biology, evolution, and the possibility of life beyond Earth. More than 5,300 years after his death, Ötzi is still changing what we think we know about the world. And if microscopic life managed to survive hidden within his frozen remains for all that time, one question becomes impossible to ignore. What else might still be waiting beneath the ice? For more than 5,300 years, Ötzi the Iceman seemed like a perfectly preserved relic of the distant past. But this latest discovery suggests his story may not be finished yet. Scientists expected to find clues about ancient humans. Instead, they may have uncovered evidence of microscopic life capable of surviving conditions once thought impossible. The discovery is forcing researchers to rethink what it means to be alive, how life endures through extreme environments, and whether similar organisms could exist far beyond Earth. And perhaps the most astonishing part is this: if something could remain preserved inside a frozen body for over 5,000 years, what other secrets might still be hidden beneath the world's ice? Let us know what you think in the comments below. Could life really survive for thousands of years in a dormant state? And what does this discovery mean for the search for life beyond Earth? If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more mysteries, discoveries, and ancient secrets that continue to challenge everything we thought we knew.